All of us have stories we tell ourselves that often we assume are true.
There's a lot of research coming out about the role that exercise plays for longevity. When you stop moving your body, guess what? The body stops moving.
There was a study not too long ago that measured NAD levels at different time points in 3 different groups. And in this particular study, older adults, and NAD levels were highest in the sedentary. They declined in every group with age, but exercise, and even more specifically, the type of exercise, made a huge difference in keeping what I would say younger levels into late life.
What's the problem if you don't have enough NAD?
Dementia, dermatitis, diarrhea, and death.
What's the relationship between inflammation and zombie cells?
Our cells get stressed all the time, often when they don't expect it. There's really 4 different doors they can go through if they get stressed. One would be, I got more than enough resources to handle the stress. Door number 2, the stress was more than they could handle and some damage happened. Door number 3, the stress was so much, the cell's fundamentally unrepairable. And door number 4 would be so much stress it was unrepairable but did go through cell death. They could wreak havoc all over.
Most people will just shrug this off, but welcome to the Mark Divine Show. I'm your host, Mark Divine. Imagine that. If you're ready to grow, push your limits, and lead with greater purpose, then guess what? You're in the right place. This show is dedicated to helping you lead with courage, resilience, and deep self-awareness. I'm super stoked today to have Dr. Greg Kelly as my guest. He's a cutting-edge human performance individual who is Senior Vice President for Product Development at a company called Qualia Life, a phenomenal company, brand known for pushing the limits of cognitive and physical optimization. Greg's a naturopathic physician. Is that right? Greg's a naturopathic physician. He's the author of a breakthrough book called Shapeshift, and he's the former editor of Alternative Medicine Review, one of the premier journals in integrative health. Greg's got deep expertise in nootropics, anti-aging, and regenerative medicine, and something called chronobiology. Curious what that is. So Greg's not about just extending lifespan, but about extending performance span. He's taught elite level clinical nutrition and human behavior at the University of Bridgeport's College of Naturopathic Medicine. And today he's helping the world's top performers upgrade everything from sleep to cellular energy. Wow, that's quite a bio, Greg. It's great to have you here.
Thanks. Great to be here today, Mark.
Thanks for joining me in person. I know you're just up the road from me in Oceanside.
Yeah. Beautiful place to live. So my first career was actually United States Navy, Surface Line, and the first place they sent me was the amphib base for SWAS back in the summer of '84, so a long time ago.
That's great. I didn't know you were a Navy officer.
Yeah.
Huh. So you went to medical school after that?
Yeah, I was active duty for about 5.5 years. Got out in '89, eventually made my way back to Hawaii, did pre-med at the University of Hawaii, nice. And then naturopathic school. At the time, there was 3. Brand new one opened in '93 in Scottsdale, Arizona, and that's where I was
early
in the first class.
The game. How did you get interested in that?
So when I first went in the Navy, I'd have been your classic, like fraternity bro kind of archetype in college. Big drinker, muddled, my way trying to eat well and exercise, but knew I didn't really know what I didn't know. And my first duty station was the amphib base in Coronado. As an officer, one of the other officers was great shape. So I just said, teach me. So he'd bring me to the gym. This was '84. Popular book back then was Eat to Win by Elson Haas.
That's a great book.
And so that became my blueprint for eating. So I was a weird officer on a ship that ate really stringently, exercised. Mm-hmm. And when I got out, I just had a keen interest in, I would say the driving question was, what does health look like? Mm-hmm. And then how do we help people achieve that, including selfishly myself? Right. And I stumbled on naturopaths in Hawaii, and they just seemed to have integrated a lot of modalities that could help with that. And so I know a lot of naturopaths that I've met over the years have been sick, and some alternative practitioner helped them to get healthy. Right. Mine was the opposite. It was
you were healthy, you wanted to stay healthy.
Yeah, I wanted, how do I stay healthy and make sure I don't track down the same trajectory as my parents.
How would you define naturopathy?
So naturopathic medicine emerged originally from 2 separate disciplines. One would have been what was nature cure in Europe, which was about diet, environment, and the other would have been the herbal traditions that came out of both America. And so it was those 2 merging back late 1800s. And then eventually over time, we embraced homeopathy. Pretty much everything alternative naturopaths grabbed hold of. So we're...
Is it primarily food or food-like interventions? I mean, we're dealing with input, right?
Yeah, it can be...
environmental as well as food input.
Yeah, we'd be thought of as primary care physicians in states where we're licensed, and we're not licensed in every state. And
you can issue
your
real
scope,
pharmacological drugs.
Yeah,
as well?
your scope varies. So in Arizona, where I went to naturopathic school, we can do a lot of pharmaceutical, like drug medicine. In California, they can't. Connecticut, where I practiced at one point, we could do different things than what Arizona allowed. But in a state like Arizona, I would have been trained in acupuncture, chiropractic, nutrition, lifestyle, homeopathy, really the whole kit and caboodle when it comes to natural therapies.
Is it the same as integrative or functional medicine?
Functional medicine spun out of, it's really more medical doctors that wanted to do what's now called functional medicine. But many of the naturopathic professors that I would have had in the early to mid 90s were some of the forerunners of that, like Joe Pizzorno would be a name. That was very instrumental in the early days of that. So there, I would say now in a practical sense, there'd be a huge overlap.
I bet. And what is integrative medicine?
Integrative medicine, I don't know what practitioners of that would define it as now, but it used to be, again, just broadening the toolbox to include a lot of things that wouldn't be conventionally part of a medical doctor's toolkit. These are just three different
names for the same thing that from different disciplines.
Yeah,
they just kind of expanded out in different directions.
Yeah, and then have over the last, since I've been in the profession almost 30 years, there's been a lot of overlap and merger.
Right.
So now at the Institute of Functional Medicine, Cara Fitzgerald, a naturopath, is one of the professors there that teaches the new candidates.
Coming together. And it's interesting, like with AI, and I want to really talk about kind of how that's pushing the boundaries of medicine, but we're getting into personalized medicine, which is a whole new kind of interesting field.
Yeah, and it's... when I was first in practice in 96, 97, 98, 99, I worked in a clinic in Greenwich, Connecticut under a naturopathic doctor, Diadamo, who's famous or infamous for writing a book on blood type and diet. Really? But even back then, his idea was, some people did much better on what we would think of now as more of a paleo or carnivore diet. Other people more on a vegetarian or vegan, and your blood type could code some of that response. And so I was doing personalized.
Has that held up over time, the science or the research?
It was mostly, I would say, N of one. His dad was a naturopath, and it was largely through observation and eliminating foods and adding some back in. Like one of the interesting things, his premise was that O blood type, as an example, was much more resilient to stress. So, what you would have gone through to become a Navy SEAL needs an incredible amount of resiliency. A's, he would have said, were the least resilient. So it's not black and white. It's not all or none. It doesn't mean an A can't
I think I may
do those things. But what I remember at one point talking to a corpsman in the SEALs, and O's is the most common blood type, but it was almost all blood type O that he'd worked with. So we tend to think of those blood types as only blood types, but those same markers are on almost all of our cells, so they code a lot.
Oh, interesting.
And then that gene's located adjacent to other genes, so there's things there. And I think the area of blood type probably makes the most difference is when immunity is compromised.
Right. That's pretty cool. Now you, over time, kind of developed an interest in longevity.
Yeah.
Now tell us about that. And then I want to really get talk about the state of the field of longevity. That's really interesting to a lot of people.
Yeah, I think all of us have stories we tell ourselves that often we assume are true. And way back, I think it was around when I would have seen Finding Nemo, that movie. There's a scene with sea turtles, and one of them says, I'm a 140-year-old and still young at heart, that kind of thing. And before that, my personal story was that I was going to live to 120. I don't know what will actually happen, but the goal was to live as much of that time span my way as possible. my dad, as an example, passed away at 68. Most of my grandparents, like lived a normal lifespan, like, mid to late 70s, early 80s. And none of them were particularly healthy at the end. So from about when I got out of the Navy at age 28, I knew that if I wanted a different outcome, I had to start doing different things and start to do them at a much younger age. It's way easier to prevent breakdown than it is to correct it.
That's true.
So my interest really goes back even to those original days, finding naturopaths in the early 90s in Hawaii. At the time, I was doing yoga and meditation, and like I mentioned, I was pretty fanatical about my diet and more rigid about my exercise back then, and taking what I would think of as almost a portfolio approach to health to make sure I was healthy then, but investing for my future.
Right. No, I like that approach. I have the same kind of mindset. I've never heard it as a portfolio approach, but I agree with that. There's a lot of research coming out about the role that exercise plays for longevity, right? I think it's absolutely crucial.
Absolutely.
If you, when you stop moving your body, guess what? The body stops moving.
For sure.
And it starts degrading, especially if you're over 50.
Yeah.
And, I've seen my anecdotal evidence through the martial arts and yoga traditions is like, man, I've seen yogis who are like 100 years old doing stretchy, bendy TikToks and super healthy bodies.
We'll diverge to NAD, but then get back to those if you don't mind. So there was a study not too long ago that measured NAD levels at different time points in 3 different groups.
So what is NAD? Let's tell us what
NAD is a compound that's in our cells, and it does many things, but 3 main things. 1, it's super important to make cellular energy. 2, it's instrumental for cells to defend themselves against stress. And 3, it fuels some things like sirtuins and DNA repair that are super important for cells to live long, productive lives, which we need for us to live long lives. And in this particular study, there was one group of sprinters, one group of long-distance runners, and one group of essentially more sedentary older adults. And NAD levels were highest in the sedentary. They declined in every group with age, but exercise, and even more specifically, the type of exercise, made a huge difference in keeping what I would say younger levels into late life for that particular marker.
I imagine the sprinters probably had the best biomarkers.
They did, yeah.
Yeah, and research is coming out about the deleterious effects of long-distance running and, just grinding it away like that. And I saw a study yesterday that said that endurance runners, like marathoners and ultra runners, were like 3 times as likely to get colon cancer.
Something
like that. There was
connection.
like 15% of that study group had colon cancer compared to like 5% or whatever the general population.
Cancer often has a connection with good immune system performance,
inflammation,
right?
Constantly inflaming yourself.
Yeah. It's a long distance event like that. There's usually at least a window of time after that the immune system's fairly suppressed. Right. It's, the way I would generally think of it, everything is stress in a simple sense, and there's stress that is a dose that we can handle and get stronger from, and a dose that's a little bit more than that.
Right.
And then there can be doses way more than that. And for most people, no matter how well trained, a marathon's in that, way more than is good for us category.
So kind of on this vein, when it comes to exercise, it's really the way you exercise is going to be important for longevity. So short, more high intensity, short interval type training.
Yeah.
Even like weighted rucking and walking.
Yeah.
Is supposed to be very good.
Yep.
Right? Because you're getting that bone mass and core development from the weight that you're carrying, either the rucksack or the weight vest. And you're not putting the impact on your body that the running and the inflammation that running would have. So what else in terms of like, how should someone organize their fitness exercise routine for optimal longevity benefits?
I think of at a minimum, really 3 different legs. One would be something to do with strength and maintaining or even building muscle. So classically, weight training, I'm a big fan of like heavy straps for that, just because they're the easiest on the joints.
Band training.
Yeah. I think something to do with cardio, which can be skipping rope or sprinting. It can be periodic, biking. It can be running if someone's into that, or rucking, and then something to do with what would classically be thought of as proprioception, so balance. Right. Like which can be walking
somatic
on sand or
something simple like that.
yoga or Tai Chi. And so I think it's really important for me personally that I have something from each consistently
Totally.
in the picture.
Yeah, you just described my workout routine.
Yeah, and I think what ends
awesome.
up happening, people often overdo one and miss one of the others completely.
Right.
So, I know some of my friends that, are much more dense yoga, they've not done, so it's hard for them. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, no, I like that. That's a portfolio approach to exercise, too.
To everything, right?
That's cool.
Yeah.
And things to avoid are long distance repetitive motion, right? Type things that are going to lead to overinflammation, as also grinding down your gears.
Yeah, I think
joints.
The other thing I think is super important to keep in mind is what I think of as like the multiple stressor thing. Like stress summates, and so think of what you would have gone through as the how weak part of that, or Army Rangers, right? There'll be sleep deprived, calorie restricted, intense exercise, exposure to extremes. That's a huge...
Physically, the benefits of the training aren't for the physical, right? There's other things that are nurture-seeking.
Yeah, and we know what happens just physiologically with blood work in that. Those studies have been done and published. And where I get concerned in the biohacking community or the performance community is people not realizing that some of these good things, when they're stacked together, might sum into something not so good. Right. So, trying to do a lot of exercise when you're sleep deprived or, calorie deprived or whatever, those things often can move it beyond being what would be thought of as a hormetic stress to now like a almost leaving a scar on our physiology. So I think it's super important to always step back and say, okay, I've heard all these podcasters say, like, do this, do that, do that. Am I doing those in a way or in a context, my lifestyle, that might actually be more stressful for me? Or am I doing it in a way that's likely the right amount given that? And a lot of the influencers, they get to spend most of their life not having a job and these other demands. So that is their job, in a sense, doing those things. And for people that have a job, I think often they may overdo it, trying to do, there's, I think Stephen Coveyism, like the enemy of the best is the good, and the Adamo was too much good is no good. And so I just try to keep those principles in mind that, for me, the most important thing is to feel well rested.
You want to be balanced, right? And make sure you're not overdoing it.
Correct.
Because you can burn out psychologically too, or just like thinking you have to be this perfect person to do your ice bath and your sauna and your chamber and your exercise and your yoga and your meditation, and you can't fit it all in, especially like you said, you're working. So to be balanced with the portfolio.
And I tend to think one thing that I know when we did the training with your team, I think the first thing that we focused on was breathing. Right? A huge thing for most of us is just getting our nervous system more grounded and having multiple touch points a day, however we do that, whether that's through breathing or meditation, but something to kind of give our rest and
always
relax.
Reset, right?
Yeah.
I would like to go through some of since you invoked biohacking and kind of what's, this push to do all these interventions. I'd like to go through them and just get your opinion or your perspective on how effective they are for longevity.
Okay.
So first is a sauna. Like, I love saunas personally. I do one 3-4 times a week. It feels really good. It feels detoxing. It's calming. I do my breathing in there. Sometimes I even work out in the sauna, which I don't recommend for everybody, but it can be an intense thing. It's like hot yoga. I know that it stimulates the immune response because there's some inflammation that, from the heat. And I believe, and I've been around older people who've sworn by the sauna, and they just have this real youthful vitality about them. And it used to be a big deal around the turn of the century. Like, my grandfather had a sauna in his house. And now it's nice to see it come back. So anyways,
so
that's what I believe about sauna. I think it's positive. It's in the positive category.
Yeah, I would agree. I think when I was first in naturopathic school, there was a 96-year-old naturopath out in the desert in Arizona. old German, Dr. Lukatz was his name, I believe. But he would have come from the nature cure end of naturopathic medicine way back, which used mostly hot and cold.
Is that
Back,
right?
100 years ago, saunas being a big part of that. Contrast always being important, right? So the going from the hot shower or hot sauna, hot shower to cold, but
bath.
for brief.
Right.
And that branch of naturopathy would have believed it's always important to finish with cold.
Okay.
And it doesn't have to be long, but you would see that in like the Finnish sauna tradition often, right? Going from a sauna, jumping in a snowbank kind of thing, right? So I think saunas I would put in the plus category as an intervention. And I think that might be the little piece that's often missing.
Like contrasted with cold.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do. I jump in our pool. It's not a cold bath, but during the winter it is.
Yeah.
But it provides enough of a contrast. I think one more on the sauna, then I want to talk about cold. Tell me about the difference between an infrared versus just hot. Like I don't really do well with the infrared. I just don't seem to get hot enough for me.
Yeah, I think when it's just the temperature, then it's doing two different things depending on how high the temperature is. But one, it's causing a lot of sweat, which then causes our heart rates to go up. It's kind of an exercise in a sense. And then depending on the temperature, the hotter we set it, the more we'll sweat, but maybe the sweet spot for mobilizing toxins is a little lower temperature sauna.
Interesting.
So a lot of the docs that I knew back in the late 90s, early 2000s that practiced therapeutic detox would do saunas, but not have people ratchet it up to as high as they can take. And then what you'd see, you'd sweat a little less, but your sweat would actually be more oily. It would be mobilizing stored toxins.
So is that what an infrared will do?
Infrared will do some of that. Infrared's also doing things to stimulate mitochondria.
Okay.
So it's working maybe more on cells than on the sweating and the mobilizing toxins.
You mentioned contrast, right? So cold, we do ice baths really more for mental training.
Yeah.
Doing cold exposure after heat. So what's the science behind that? And is there too much that's not good, like you said before?
Yeah. So the old, like what would have been some of my teachers that used hydrotherapy as a main modality would usually do hot for say 2 to 3 minutes and then cold for about 30 seconds to a minute. So it doesn't have to be long. Like our nervous system adapts or responds really quickly to that contrast.
Okay.
And it doesn't even have to be crazy extremes of cold because, if you get your shower close to, as hot as you can
people
endure.
People are doing cold, like ice baths and trying to stay in it for 6 minutes. That's a little extreme, I think.
Yeah, that's doing something more than just the contrast.
Got it.
Of just setting, even here in San Diego area, your shower to as cold as it can get in the winter from the hot is going to create a contrast in a few cycles. And usually I would think of 2 to 3 cycles of that is sufficient to really give like an alerting effect and to stimulate our nervous system in a really healthy way.
Okay. That's interesting.
So, more is often not better. It's more is what moves it from a good stress to sometimes too much stress for people.
So you prefer to see more frequent hot cold exposure as opposed to like what I do, which is like I'm in the sauna for 20 minutes and then I get in the pool.
Yeah, I would
3.
You'll have to see how it works for you, but yeah, I would suggest like break that up and do 2 or 3 cycles in that amount of time and see if you notice any difference in terms of how you feel.
That's cool.
But it's often that back and forth, right? The creating opposing states is the way I would think of it, right?
Got it. That's cool. So obviously nutrition is a big deal for longevity too, right? We know from, although I don't know, seen recent research about the blue zone studies, some of the research has been poked holes in a little bit. Yeah. But, eating like less food than the typical American diet seems to be like pointing toward longevity. And that can come in the form of fasting or intermittent fasting or fast-mimicking, right? And also hydration, which we were talking about a little bit earlier. So let's talk about fasting, hydration, and like quality and quantity of food and how they affect the body for longevity. What's going on, leaders, warriors, and CEOs? Let me ask you something. What if 3 days could change the way you lead forever? Not with hype, but with a proven system tested by Navy SEALs CEOs, and other high-stakes leaders who've learned to lead themselves before leading others. Most leadership training focuses on strategy and tactics. But if your inner world is misaligned, no strategy is going to save you. That's why I created the Unbeatable Leader Challenge. It's not about more information. It's about transformation. In 3 days, I'll give you not only the tools, but the live training to master your mind, your emotions, and your mission. Join the thousands who've taken my challenges and walked away with a battle-tested framework to unlock courage, clarity, and conviction in the most demanding moments of life and leadership. Grab your spot now at unbeatableleader.com. Once again, that's unbeatableleader.com. It's time to become the leader that you were born to be. Hoo-yah. Now let's get back to the show.
I think the most evidence-based thing is Walter Longo's fasting-mimicking diet.
Mm-hmm.
So he's, I believe he's at USC or UCLA, or that's where he was doing it. And the fasting-mimicking diet, he's studied in animals, he's studied it in humans for cancer and some autoimmune diseases. And it's really...
Is it just a caloric restriction diet?
Yeah, it's a really specific protocol for 5 days usually, is that, and then you refeed. And during those 5 days, Prolon would be the brand that he sells the plan through. That will send you all the food. But the principles would be you go really low protein. You reduce calories. The first day, I think it's down to about 1,200. The next few, it's in the 800-900 range. And you just do that for 5 days. So during those days, if you're eating the Prolon food, it's going to be mostly, good fats and vegetable broths, soup, that kind of thing. And then you refeed after. And that, again, that opposing states, some of the magic happens when you refeed. So during those 5 days, you'd be promoting autophagy, maybe getting rid of some senescent cells. And then when you refeed coming off that, it creates that huge contrast again, right? You went from a relative deficit now to a normal amount, creates contrast, so you have a really anabolic response.
Got it.
The long-term calorie restriction, they've done those studies going back 60 years in animals. I don't think those are feasible for humans. One of the things that happens even in animals is you trigger somewhat of a hibernation response. So they're not the most active animals. It would be a hard way to live our lives. And I was a big fan of Survivor in the early years. I haven't watched it recently, but part of the setup in those early shows was they weren't getting enough calories early, so they just think about food. All the rewards were food. They lie around and only got really active when there was a reward challenge for food. So that's not a great way to live a productive, happy life. So in a sense, what we eat often dictates how much we eat. If we eat junky food, we'll often consume a lot more calories than if we eat a better quality diet. So I think the more reasonable thing is do our best to make good qualitative decisions about food. Don't worry about how much we eat, and then periodically integrate something that would be like the fasting mimicking diet.
Is there any consensus on a particular nutritional plan or diet, like keto or carnivore or paleo or Mediterranean, blue zone?
I've seen them all come and go, and my sense is for different people are optimized for different diets, which would make sense in a like humans evolution sense, right? We wouldn't want everyone in a village to all be wiped out by the same food shortage. So I think some of us are wired to do better on certain ones. Definitely seasonally, it seems like if you for people wanting to do more keto, the winter is an easier time for that. Summer, when there's lots of fruits and other things, I know I personally enjoy those. So I think I would describe myself at this point as more of an intuitive eater, that I've done a lot over decades to get in touch with what my body seems to want. And if it's craving crappy things, usually there's a reason, like I'm not getting enough sleep or something. But otherwise, it does a pretty good job directing me, and I think, net keeping me healthy. So I think maybe the main message would be don't get rigid about a diet. When I was a naturopathic student, one of my professors at the time had used diet a lot to help people get healthier. And one of his main pieces of wisdom was there can be a big difference between a diet that takes a sick person and gets them healthier and a diet that then keeps them healthier.
Right.
And often what people get emotionally invested in the diet that moved them to healthy, and then they move right through health to a different degree of problem.
Right.
So I would just say for the listeners, all these diets can be great, all can be super useful. Just don't become attached like this is the right way or the only way. It might be for the listener right now and maybe won't be come December or come next year.
Right.
So
yeah, I agree with that. Rob Wolf, the co-founder of Element, is a good friend of ours, right? He's such a neat guy. And I love that he's really bringing salt back into the discussion, right? Because that got trounced by the AMA, I think, and the people who said this is leading to hypertension and all that, and so people I think are chronically dehydrated as well as lacking electrolytes.
Correct.
And so let's talk about the effect that has, especially on elderly, and then the importance of electrolytes and hydration for longevity.
Yeah. So the way I understand the reason salt was vilified is. High salt in some people can cause slight increases in blood pressure.
Right.
Increases in blood pressure are linked to heart disease. So working backwards, at some point, it's like, well, let's just have people eat less salt. At least in observational studies, which would be population studies, restricting salt usually ends in bad things for humans, at least in mass in a group. But that hasn't prevented well-intentioned doctors over many years, including when my dad was alive. He was told to restrict salt. My mom, who's still alive, has been reading salt and restricting it based on her doctor's advice for at least 15 years. And my mom chronically complains about feeling dehydrated and not holding on to water. And think of our blood as more like the osmolality or the mineral content of the ocean, right? Mm-hmm. There's a lot of salt, there's chloride, there's other minerals. That's what our blood's like. Our blood's not the consistency of water.
Right.
And if we just drink demineralized water, we're, in a sense, diluting our blood. The response then is to just urinate that out, right? We're trying to get rid of that extra water and then maybe pull minerals from our bones or our teeth or other places.
Oh, interesting.
And so one of the challenges is evolutionarily humans would have largely just drank water that was mineralized. Mm-hmm. Where now, because of concerns about impure water, many healthy people do reverse osmosis or other things that strip all the minerals out.
Right.
So we already tend to get demineralized water compared to what we were programmed to get. And then salt is interesting because salt's involved in a lot of transport of things. So creatine has been having a huge moment. I've been asked about creatine a lot over the last year. Creatine uses a sodium transporter to get absorbed from our intestines and then a sodium transporter to get into our muscles.
And no sodium, no transporter.
Well, yeah. So sodium does a lot of really important things that have to do with moving things in and out of cells.
Interesting.
And hydration's really about what's inside of our cells, not what's in our blood. Mm-hmm. And so what classically happens, people that drink maybe a more pure water get enough hydration in the sense they're consuming enough water, but their body's not retaining it. It's not getting into our tissues and being held on to. And salt helps that. And I think in our lifetime, because I was born in 1962, so after antibiotics came about, that what would be the science of oral rehydration salts has probably saved more lives than anything else. I know the World Health Organization maybe 5 or 6 years ago had estimated 55 million lives had been saved because dysentery, cholera. Oral rehydration salts is really specific. It's glucose, salt in the right ratio is the main part of it. And even in athletes, oral rehydration salts, work as well or better than the cutting edge things. So the science of hydration through the 60s and early 70s, when they were really trying to figure out how to save people in these remote parts of the world where cholera and dysentery were an issue, all got sorted out really well. So we know how hydration works, and there's some great hydration products on the market. And Subjectively, many people that I know and have worked with do great when they prioritize, a good hydration, often to start their day, and then before exercise, and sometimes even then, having, a few gulps during
Yeah, I was going to
an
ask you,
exercise session.
like, is there too much that you can do in terms of electrolyte or the sodium?
Yeah, I tend to think there's a Goldilocks
Yeah.
rule for almost everything. So I know for me personally, it would be a start of the day thing. Is
So
when
like
I have
one packet of Element or whatever your hydration
yeah.
of choices.
And then I usually, if I do feel dehydrated for something, travel, some other reason, then maybe a bit more. Otherwise, then I bolus mine just before and during workouts.
What is the best natural electrolyte substitute for if someone doesn't want to buy a packet of powder and
Well, I mean, it would be
cucumber water or like something like that?
I mean, it's often thought of as coconut water.
Coconut water.
Coconut's going to be way higher in potassium than sodium. So depending on, usually it's salt that we tend to waste more when we're perspiring or in a desert climate. And potassium can sometimes imbalance that more. So we were in one of the breaks talking about people that are dehydrated when they do an IV and they're putting things in. It's a saline solution, right? Salt.
Right. So that makes sense. Okay, we got a lot more to talk about because I want to really get into like the state of the art of supplementation.
Yeah.
Right. A while ago, there was this guy out of Harvard. You might know his name. I can't think of it right now. It was
David Sinclair.
David
maybe?
Sinclair, yeah, promoting. He had a book, right, like Lifespan or something like that, promoting metformin, almost like a supplement for longevity, even though it's a drug that was built for diabetes, I think, right?
Yes, correct.
A bunch of other NAD, some other interventions, and that's kind of the center of your work at Qualia, right? And so I want to kind of talk about these supplemental interventions that are right on the cutting edge of longevity and that are becoming available, and like what's the future look like. And you mentioned earlier, and I got intrigued, like the role of psilocybin, right, as a supplement for longevity. Tell us about what's happening there.
Yeah. So psilocybin would be found in mushrooms, right? It's the active compound in those. And in July, there was a study published. It's done in mice. Always, you start in animal models for longevity. But it was the first longevity study that I've seen that looked at a psychedelic compound. And they gave it to female mice. I think the mice were 18 months of age, kind of equivalent to, say, like late 50s in a human. And they gave it once a month until they finished the experiment 10 months later. So that would have equivalent maybe an 80-year human. And in the group getting the placebo, I think 80% of the animals had died over that 10-month dosing cycle. And I think it was about 80% of the animals given this psilocybin were still alive.
No kidding.
No, maybe it was 50%. Anyways, there was a big difference. So it was the first study I've seen where a psychedelic compound looked like it had extended lifespan. And in an amount that wasn't crazy high. It would, I think it would be like doing a high amount of about 6 grams of medical mushrooms. That would be a high concentration of psilocybin equivalent, but it was not an everyday thing. It was just, again, a periodic thing. And
That's interesting.
And I think plant medicine, if nothing else, like my dad would be an example. He retired at 63, had been a president of a big engineering company, never really found something purposeful after that. And, it was one thing after another. And by 68, he died of cancer. And I remember hearing, I don't know if this is more urban myth or true, but that when the World War II time period, when the military was figuring out, pension for retirees from the military, they did a lot of stats and realized the average person, no matter how young they retired from the military, on average was living about 5 or 6 years, so they could afford a really great pension. And I think nowadays, people like yourself transition out and get really purposeful, meaningful careers. But my sense is without purpose and meaning, we don't get to stay around the world as long, right?
Right. Okay.
And, that would be a thing in some of these blue zones. I think
Mm-hmm.
they do really well. The elderly often do have a really
They've got a strong
profound
purpose. They've got a
purpose.
strong community. They're outside, getting a lot of
Yeah.
exercise, eating close to the earth.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think it's something I've seen with some of these like psychedelic plant medicines.
Yeah, they help
They
you
often-
find that purpose.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's powerful. That's really interesting. We mentioned NAD earlier and the function of NAD. And I know Qualia came out with an NAD supplement recently.
yeah.
So is it something that you take, or does it stimulate the production of NAD? In other
Yeah.
words, am I ingesting NAD with your supplement, or is it stimulating?
That's a great question. So you're taking in things that help your body make it.
Okay.
Yeah, NAD would be thought of as a big molecule in a relative sense, meaning if we consumed it orally.
Right, 'cause I can go get an injection of
Correct.
NAD, and that's real NAD.
That's
It's
real
going
NAD.
straight into my system.
Yeah, and that'll go into your circulation, but not into your cells
Got it.
because it's still too big to get into cells.
Is it?
So it does a lot with signaling. Super great intervention that's been
Mhm.
used for decades for addictions,
Right.
as an example. But to get the NAD amount inside our cells to go up, we need to take in compounds that can get in our cells, and then they get reassembled into the NAD molecule there. So it's things like nicotinamide riboside, the older types of vitamin B3 like the fleshing niacin can do it. But we need to take a lot more than we would get in food to make up for the declines that happen as people get older. So I've measured my NAD levels a few different times without supplementation and then with supplementation, and feel like I do things pretty healthy for a 63-year-old, and then overall pay attention to my diet, exercise, but my baseline levels of NAD just aren't in an optimal range if I don't supplement something
Interesting,
to
okay.
bring them higher.
And so what's the problem if you don't have enough NAD, if you're not producing enough?
Yeah, so the jobs of NAD would be energy, cellular defenses, responding to cellular stress, and then repairing damage fundamentally. So many of those things we don't really feel until we're deep in the hole, so to speak. So the classic things of B3 deficiency, which would be the extreme of not having enough NAD, were usually thought of as the 4Ds. So dementia, but dementia back in the 40s didn't mean what we think today with Alzheimer's. It meant more what people think of were lack of focus and brain fog. So cognitive and mood, you see it even like relatively early. The second D was dermatitis, so like skin things.
Skin problem.
The third D was diarrhea. So think IBS now, like that type of thing, but something to do with the GI system. And the fourth was death.
Oh,
So
wow.
usually what we would see when we help someone optimize NAD, the most common two things are people feeling like they have more energy and more emotional resilience.
Interesting.
And then other things, sometimes sleep, it can kind of vary. Skin sometimes, GI issues.
Oh, that's cool. Two other supplements that you guys are pioneering. One is this senescence, right?
Yeah.
Senolytic, Qualia senolytic as
Yeah.
well. So this is supposed to like somehow sweep out or ferret out senescent cells, which are zombie cells, right?
Correct, yeah.
And so tell us about that, and also the new stem cell stimulant.
Sure. So the way I think of zombie cells is think of just like us, our cells get stressed all the time, often when they don't expect it, right? So there's really 4 different doors they can go through if they get stressed. One would be, I got this. Like I got more than enough resources to handle the stress. This stress just happened. It was hormetic. I'm tougher for the experience, right? I can handle now more stress in the future. So that's door number 1. That's the door we want them to go through all the time. Door number 2 is the stress was more than they could handle and some damage happened. Maybe proteins got gunked up, maybe DNA got damaged, but the cell is still fundamentally repairable. So, that's where the fasting-mimicking diet and some of these things that are hormetic stresses and autophagy in those processes help with door number 2. They help the cell repair itself. Door number 3 is the stress was so much, the cell is fundamentally unrepairable.
Okay.
And it didn't go through cellular death, so it's lingering around, and that's why
That's
the zombie cell. And door number 4 would be like so much stress it was unrepairable, but did go through cell death. And that would be preferable to door number 3.
So cell death means it's going to get flushed out of the body through natural causes,
So
but the zombie cells aren't.
Yeah, so what happens when a cell dies in that organized way, it breaks into little particles. It just fragments, and the immune system gobbles up the pieces and recycles it. Think of like a leaf falling into the soil getting reused. So we don't flush out these cells, we just reuse the parts.
Building blocks.
And the zombie cell, or these senescent cells, they're problematic because, one, they take up space that should be used for healthy cells. And then even more problematic, they secrete a lot of bad compounds into the environment around them. And one of the interesting things is they've transplanted senescent cells or zombie cells into the skin, and it can impact cognition in an animal just because of these inflammatory things that they're secreting into the world around them.
Interesting.
They can wreak havoc all over. So almost every classic issue with aging, at least some contribution of that comes from zombie cells. So, and because they went through door number 3 and didn't have figured out how to resist cellular death, there's no easy way to get rid of them. And so what happens as we age is we just accumulate more and more. So the analogy I gave to our head of marketing, who was a gardener way back, is just think, you go out today in your garden, like the plant here, all the leaves are green, like, I'm a great gardener. You go out, 2 weeks from now, there's a yellow leaf. You're like, oh, my plant's a little stressed. You go out, 2 more weeks, and now there's 5, 6, like a third of the plant is yellowing leaves, and now that plant's going to really struggle. And that's what happens with age. We have the equivalent of like more and more yellow leaves building up in our tissues. And the idea of senolytics are these compounds that we would take that would finally get the zombie cell to go through cellular death and be removed from the tissue.
How do we discover these compounds, right? Like, where did that science come from even?
Yeah, it was researchers at Scripps Institute of Aging, which is in Florida, and Mayo Clinic were the ones, they published this in 2015, but they were the ones that had this idea that there must be compounds that could convince one of these zombie cells to finally go through door number 4. And they screened a whole bunch of compounds, and at the time identified 2, quercetin, which is a flavonoid, it's been in supplements, my entire career, and then an immunomodulator, an actual medication called dasatinib. And what they found is that combination together was more effective than either on its own. And so that was the original 2015, so not 10 years ago.
Early.
And then since then, that same research group identified another plant compound called vicetin. Other groups have found piperlongamine, which is from a long pepper out of Ayurveda. There's a compound in olives that is specific, at least for senescent cells in our knee area. So since then, it's really blossomed. And I remember this was a conversation maybe around the beginning of 2020 at the Qualia office. My boss at the time was asking me what I thought we'd be talking about 10 years from now. And because everyone was talking about NAD even in 2020, I said, I think NAD is still going to be important, but I think zombie cells are going to be the thing.
Big deal, yeah.
Yeah. And
so I really haven't heard much about them until I started seeing Qualia is a sponsor of a podcast, so I've been reading scripts about that, and it's fascinating. And I did try one cycle. I need to get some more.
Yeah.
Right? 'Cause it's like you take the supplement once every 30 days or something like that. What's the purpose? So it's not something you take every day.
Yeah, so from the get-go, in part because dasatinib's a pretty powerful immunomodulator with a lot of potential downsides. The immune system, the Mayo Clinic researchers came up with this idea right from the get-go of hit-and-run approach. So that contrast, let's do something intense for a few days and then take a break from it, right? And so from the beginning stages of the work with senolytic compounds, it's always been that intermittent approach, which makes sense to me.
Yeah, it does to me.
Think of, so our senses, vision, hearing, the way they're designed to work is on proportional change. So meaning it's not just a quantity of something. So if we turned all the lights off in your studio and lit one candle, we'd notice a big difference in here. But if we had 99 candles lit and lit one more, we might not notice anything. So one candle means nothing. It's always the change from the background.
Got it.
And when we do these intermittent things with these senolytic compounds, we're creating a massive change in the world around cells that they're their receptors, their senses are
Similar
picking
to a
up.
fast.
Yeah, correct.
Interesting. And how often would you need to do the protocol?
So
Is it a one and done, and all of a sudden I'm cleaning all the zombie cells? Or
no, it
not?
would be more, the way I would think of it would be, again, that gardening thing.
Yeah.
It would be more like pruning a few yellow leaves each time we do a cycle.
Got it.
And new yellow leaves may, especially as we get older, come out over time. So I usually take Qualia Senolytic the first weekend of every month, which coincidentally times out it's a few days from when
So
we're recording
once a
this.
month.
And if I was working with someone that had, the equivalent of symptoms that would suggest they had a lot of senescent cells, so, issues with their joints, as an example, that would for sure, that would be contributing in an age sense. I would do it every other week to get them started.
What's the relationship between inflammation and zombie cells?
So zombie cells are creating a lot of the inflammation. Yeah, they're secreting these compounds out that then are
inflame the area.
Yeah, so we've looked at like a 48 protein inflammatory panel in the blood, and there's almost a signature that senescent cells create. They just compare to what would be, someone, say, young with like a normal level of inflammation. As we get older, the stew in our blood just changes and becomes very pro-inflammatory. And a lot of that is what senescent cells are putting out into circulation.
Fascinating. Yeah, what about the new stem cell intervention?
Stem cells, in my, say 30 plus years in naturopathic school and since, stem cells have always been maybe the number one longevity intervention during that time period. And the stem cells are more of a category than a distinct thing. There's umbilical stem cells and embryonic stem cells and mesenchymal stem cells and ones you'd harvest from fat cells. But stem cells would be our natural repair and rejuvenation things, right? They fundamentally make new cells, that can then fill our tissues and keep our tissues young and healthy. And stem cells, there's some in our muscles. Those are called satellite cells. There's some, in our fat systems. There's some in our intestines. But the main storage site is bone marrow. Bone marrow. Yeah. And there's different types. There's stem cells that can get released from that can create immune cells and red blood cells. There's another, they're called mesenchymal stem cells. They can differentiate into other things like cartilage or endothelial is another type. So there's these different types that as adults we have. And most of the time our stem cells are basically dormant. They would say quiescent is the scientific. So for listeners, just think they're sleeping. Right. And then when they're needed, they get woken up and they become more active and they do things. They first they travel to where they're needed, and that's almost danger signals from that tissue. Like if we have an injury, we're creating almost a magnet pulling stem cells there. So they get woken up, they get trafficked to where they're needed, then they multiply like crazy there, and then eventually differentiate into the type of tissue we need. So that group of four things, mobilizing, migrating, proliferating, and differentiating, usually you'd hear that called stem cell activation. Okay. And my sense would be is we don't want to do things to push that activation all the time. We want to let them hang out for a good chunk of the time and then periodically wake some up and say, okay, do some healing. Right. So I first would have looked into, herbs and other things that had been studied for stem cell back, I think at this point, 5 years ago. And at the time, it didn't make sense to me how people were applying that science and saying, take this, this supplement with these herbs, say, every day, every month, indefinitely. And I was at something called Summit Baja come November, it'll be a year ago. And I was, Dr. Diamandis, super famous longevity MD, was hosting. There was a woman, the most genetically modified human on the planet. She's done follistatin and clotho changes to her genes. And then a doc running a stem cell clinic. And the doc mentioned for his clinic, what they do is they harvest people's stem cells. So people would go in when they're younger, they do a specific medication that causes some stem cells to be mobilized from circulation. They harvest those from the blood and they cryo them. And it clicked for me. What I think ideally you would want, and what we're doing at Qualia, is we want to just periodically mobilize more or activate more, and then leave them alone the rest of the time. So one of the things that I think will make our product distinct is it's like senolytic. That's a 2-day protocol. We're recommending just 4 days, and it would be a great follow-on a couple of days after the senolytic product.
Yeah, I would think so.
Yeah.
And the protocol, you're right, is short. Protocol is like a 3 or 4 day protocol.
Yeah, 4 is what we're thinking is an optimal.
Right.
And if someone then needed, it more, you would just do more frequent cycles. If someone younger or someone that's just trying to do more like an investment in the future, then more spread out, like you would with fasting, as an example.
So if you're older, maybe once a month, but if you're younger, once a quarter or something like that. Or
exactly.
Fascinating. So we got to wrap up soon here. This has been really interesting, but what's your 10-year vision? Like, where's technology? AI is going to be cranking out all sorts of real new interventions. What do you see coming?
So I think a couple things. One, the gut microbiome clearly has a huge impact on aging. We've seen that with when they do fecal microbial transplants from young animals into old and vice versa. So just like young blood, that idea. But that's a crazy complicated ecosystem that I know my brain's never going to be smart enough to figure out, but AI might start to. And so I think there'll be huge advances in what we understand about how to intervene in the microbiome in a way that translates into both health for younger people, but definitely longevity. I think the challenge with longevity, even in animals, it takes a while to see if something works, right? Even in a short-lived thing like a mouse. And a big limitation has been most of the science so far has just been giving one molecule at a time and seeing. And my intuition is there's probably some things that are subtractive and some things that are additive. And that's hard for us to figure out just looking at the known mechanisms, because the truth is in our bodies, these things interact in way more complicated ways than we understand. Things that, like sirtuins that David Sinclair talks about, those weren't even known about when I was doing, biochem and, my pre-med or naturopathic degree in the mid-90s. There's just so much more. It's like the tunnel always goes deeper and deeper. And then the last piece I think would maybe be plant medicines. I think there's something energetic and magical that we're missing in science right now that those older traditions had a better grasp on. So I think as we start to, as they start to share more of their knowledge with us and our scientists start to better grasp that, some of our models and understanding about health will shift dramatically. Right now we're very locked in a reductionist model. I would be surprised if we don't abandon that model for health at some point in the next couple decades.
Interesting. Yeah.
It's just not predictive.
Right.
It's why we get to things like restricting, people from eating eggs because they have cholesterol or salt, right? There's poor predictability.
And I think what we also, I agree with that. And we also haven't addressed here in the West just the power of the mind.
Absolutely.
Right. And, the ancient yogis, right? They did a lot of they weren't taking supplements. They exercised. They ate very, little. But one of the main things they did is they completely sequestered themselves from any negative energy.
Yeah.
They didn't take in any negative energy.
Yeah. I think.
And so that's a big deal.
The other thing mentally, I might, be mistaken, but my story is reality is far broader 100%. Than what our
That's
limited.
a different podcast.
Yeah.
I would love to have that someday. I agree with you.
And that.
It's quantum energy, and so if you at the mental level, if you can begin to work with your physiology at the quantum level, which is what advanced yoga techniques do. I remember, I'll say this, but this is kind of funny. Most people will just shrug this off, but one of my deceased guru teachers is a guy named Nisargadatta Maharaj. And he didn't write anything, but they recorded his talks with people. People would come to visit him, enlightened guy. And he tells a story about this 1,000-year yogi coming to visit him. And Maharaj was give him a hard time. It's like, why? What's your point? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You're so attached to your body. Oh. And his whole point is like, don't be attached to the body.
Yeah.
It's just a temporary vehicle. And, you know, I've seen countless references. I've said this so many times in this podcast, and people think I'm nuts, but countless references in Qigong masters, right? Like, people don't know how old they are.
Yeah.
And then you had, like, I do part of my yoga practice, the Tibetan rites every day.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a great book called Fountain of Youth.
I read that. Yeah. It's seven.
Describes the seven practices. Yeah. But it describes this. It was a British colonel who went to Tibet and discovered these longevity practitioners in this, in this monastery. I mean, they were doing a lot of different work, but one of the things they did was these rites, and they were all like well into their hundreds and super youthful bodies. And he completely transformed from gray hair back to brown hair and fit and healthy, and went back and started teaching people this. So there's a pony in there somewhere.
Yeah.
Western science is way behind and even trying to grasp any of that.
Yeah.
Because of the reductionism, I think.
Yeah. I think we have placed the limits on our understanding. Right. The limits are much broader than that. And so I think part of the, at least one of my goals is to argue for possibility instead of arguing for limitations.
Yeah, agree.
And then, do the practices like you're doing to start your day that keep my body, physically resilient and mobile and feeling young. Because, no matter how long I live, I'm not attached to that number. I do want to do my best to be contributing to people. I
think you're right. Probably the biggest contributor to aging is belief in it.
Yeah.
That's
absolutely.
A hard belief to break, though.
It is, because it's an easy story to have because we see evidence for it all the time. Yeah. But it's an opportunity, right, to reset and tell ourselves a better story.
Yeah. Well said. Fantastic. Really, really interesting. I really appreciate your time here and fascinating stuff. I'm going to go get myself some qualia senolytic and stem cells. And you can find all that at qualialife.com. You recently rebranded. It was Neurohacker Collective.
Yeah.
Now it's Qualia Life. Great name. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me. It was great to get to spend time with you again in person. So.
Likewise. Hoo-yah. So, here we are. Another one wrapped up. Thanks for tuning in to the Mark Divine Show. I appreciate you walking this path of leadership, growth, impact, and longevity with me. If today's discussion with Greg inspired you, please share it with friends and colleagues. Spread the word, leave a review to help others discover the show, and check out incredible products at qualialife.com. To learn more about the work that I do and my team, visit unbeatablemind.com. You can discover there how to work directly with me in our leadership development programs, our Unbeatable Leader Transformation Challenge, and other programs. You can also check me out and follow us on Instagram at MarkDivineOfficial for additional insights or to send me a note. So thanks again. Until next episode, be unbeatable. Hoo-yah. Divine out.